What's up, Star Wars nerds, and welcome back to the channel. This is episode 32 of Brett on Fett, and if you're a collector of pop culture franchises such as Star Wars and Marvel, you may have heard of a company called Gentle-Giant. Now, Gentle-Giant manufactures three-dimensional representations such as statues, busts, figurines, and maquettes. And they use advanced scanning technology to create likenesses of various characters and props to create these products that fans have grown to really love. Now, since 2010, Gentle-Giant has been making these 12-inch scale versions of original vintage Kenner Star Wars figures, and they call this line Jumbo Figures. And to date, Gentle-Giant has made over 88 of these for Star Wars. And to create these massive vintage style toys, Gentle-Giant digitally scanned the original 3.75-inch vintage Kenner figures and made the molds for the 12-inch scale from those scans. Those of you who have been following my channel for a while may recall on my very first episode briefly showing off my Gentle-Giant Jumbo Rocket-Firing Boba Fett. Oh god. Now, most of these jumbos have been based on original vintage Kenner figures. However, Gentle-Giant is now putting out vintage style figures based on the concept art from renowned Star Wars artist Ralph McQuarrie. And if you're familiar with my channel, you may be aware that I am a huge fan of Ralph McQuarrie's concept art. Check out episode 7 of Brett on Fett, where I go over the concept art of Ralph McQuarrie and all of the toys that Hasbro put out based on McQuarrie's art. So for the first time, not only are we getting vintage style Kenner figures based on McQuarrie's original concept art, but we're getting them in a massive 12-inch scale, which is pretty awesome. And to kick off their line of these McQuarrie concept jumbo figures, Gentle-Giant has started with two of the most iconic characters in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. I pre-ordered these bad boys a while back, and about a month ago, the Darth Vader arrived from Entertainment Earth, and then earlier today, the Luke Skywalker arrived. So let's take a closer look at this vintage style concept art goodness. And here they are side by side, the Jumbo McQuarrie Concept Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. As you can see, I've placed a regular 3 3/4 Boba Fett figure in front of them for scale, so you can see how massive these figures really are. Now, before we get started, I do want to apologize because I know the filming is going to be a little bit bad on these things because they are in a clear plastic clamshell protective case. And so there's going to be glare, and it's going to be a little bit hard to show these guys off properly because these clamshell cases are sealed with tape, and I just don't want to cut the tape and take them out, so I apologize for that. Now, that being said, if you're not real familiar with these jumbo figures, one really cool thing that Gentle-Giant does is the bubbles are not glued down to the card backs. So if you are willing to cut the tape, you can open up these clamshell cases and actually remove the bubble with the figure without tearing anything. And you can take the figures out, and if you wanted to, you could assemble it all back together because the bubbles are just being held securely on the card by the clamshell case itself. So that's a really cool feature. I just personally don't want to deal with cutting the tape and all that. I just rather keep them mint sealed. So just bear with me on this video. Alright, so now that we got that out of the way, let's get Boba Fett out of the way and get started. And I'm going to start with Darth Vader since he's the first one I got in the mail about a month ago. And he is awesome. You can see it's got his half of that famous McQuarrie art piece of him dueling Luke Skywalker. Now, interesting, on the bottom, you'll see here, instead of saying Kenner, it just says Gentle-Giant. And I believe that's because they're only using that Kenner logo on figures that already were released originally by Kenner. Now, looking at the figure itself, the first thing you notice is he is not black. He is actually a dark blue on most of his body. And that's because they're trying to emulate that bluish glow that's on the character in the art. And I thought that was a really awesome choice to do that. And I think he looks good in that midnight blue. And then same thing with this saber. They used a very pale blue saber. I'll throw a photo up so you can get a better look at it. But again, they're just trying to emulate that very pale bluish glow of his saber in the artwork. You see he's got the vinyl cape. And the detailing on his armor is what you'd expect for a vintage style figure. And I love that helmet. It's such a cool version of Vader. It's just a more menacing look. I'm not saying it's necessarily better than what we ended up with in the film, but it's definitely a more terrifying version. So I think it's a great alternate version to have. And here's a look at the rest of the wave coming, and man, am I in trouble, because when I pre-ordered Luke and Vader, I thought maybe that was going to be it for these McQuarrie concepts, but then come to learn once I received these that there's going to be the Stormtrooper, Solo, and C-3PO. So I'm going to have to figure out how I'm going to make some room for those three guys, because I just love McQuarrie stuff, and so I've got to have it. All right, so that's Vader. He is awesome. But moving on to my favorite of the two, the concept Luke Skywalker, or some might call him Scuba Luke. And here's the look at the art. Again, it's that left half of that famous piece from Ralph McQuarrie of him dueling with Vader. And here he is with his face apparatus. Now, the goggles are interesting to me. They've gone with a red tint, but on the artwork, you can't see what color the goggles are because he's facing away. And as far as I know, there is no McQuarrie sketches showing the front view of Luke wearing this apparatus on his face. And so you're left to interpretation on what the goggles actually look like. But in previous renditions of this character, I've seen either clear goggles or some with a purple hue. I've never seen red, so I just thought that was an interesting choice. I don't think it looks bad. I think it looks pretty good with the blue shirt, although purple I think would have worked just as well. But moving on, I love the detailing on his shirt. It captures the look of his uniform from the art while maintaining that simplistic vintage Kenner style. And here's another interesting thing is his lightsaber is a separate piece. It's not built into his arm like the typical vintage Jedi figures and like they did with the Vader. So I thought that was an interesting choice to go a different route with the saber, considering the Vader and this figure supposedly go together. So I don't know how I feel about that. It's not a big deal, but I just thought it was interesting why they did that. And then taking a look at the back, you'll see it's exactly the same as the Vader card back. So nothing new here. But man, just an awesome figure. A very unique version of Luke I've always loved. So very happy with these. And what I want to do is I just want to grab these two characters from the 30th anniversary Hasbro line. And as you can see, this is a modern line. They're not going for a vintage look. So very different, a much more realistic version, if you will, of Vader. They went with the black hair. They didn't go with the bluish hue, which is fine. So it's just interesting, the differences. But yeah, definitely a modern version of this concept Vader. And then looking over at the Luke. Now this one came in a clamshell. It was a celebration version, so extra glare here. But again, just a more realistic, obviously modern version. I thought it was interesting that their interpretation of Luke's saber is more of a yellow hue. On the art, to me, it's just a pure white. So, you know, Gentle-Giant with the white, but they went with the yellow. I just thought that was interesting. But anyways, very cool stuff. I just can't get enough of these McQuarrie concept figures. So I hope Hasbro and Gentle-Giant keep putting them out. So let's put Boba back for scale again. And man, I am just very happy with these. Very cool figures. I'm going to be mounting these up high on my wall next to some of my McQuarrie art. And I look forward to figuring out how I'm going to possibly find room for the rest of that wave. Now, sort of a bonus, I've decided to bring out a couple of my other jumbo figures. This is my Rocket-Firing Boba Fett and the IG-88. And let's start with IG-88 first. And right off the bat, one of the first things you might notice on the card back is on Empire Strikes Back, it's missing the eye Apparently, the first wave of these that went out, they had that printing error, and later General Giant corrected it. But to be honest, I have no idea which variant is more prevalent. But a classic card back to be sure, and then looking at the figure, man, they nailed it with this one. IG-88 is one of my favorite vintage Kenner figures as a child. I just don't think it could look much better than it does. Even the weapons look great. His bandolier, everything seems to match pretty good. But just to make sure, let's grab one of my actual vintage Kenner IG-88s and just do a little comparison real quick. So here's my IG-88. I'm going to put his rifle down because it's probably going to fall. All right, so let's just take a quick look at these guys together. And yeah, I mean, going back and forth, I mean, it just seems spot on. There are a couple tiny little details I can see differently, like over his kind of belly area, that little apparatus there that's a little bit different maybe, but overall I'm just kind of going back and forth. It's really good. It's really close. Again, they use that scanning technology and to make the molds, and so apparently it's working pretty well, so pretty happy with that. Now, I realized after filming these two figures and mounting them back high on my wall that I forgot to show you guys the back of the cards. And so here's a quick image of what the back of the IG-88 figure looks like. As you can see, it just shows a bunch of the other jumbo figures as well as a few busts that General Giant was coming out with at the time. All right, moving on to the Boba Fett. This is the Rocket-Firing Boba Fett. This was a 2013 release, I believe, and you can see it's got that classic Fett background there, and then it's got this nice sticker that says exclusive feature rocket-firing jetpack with spring-launched rocket. So this is based on a version that was never really released since they canceled that rocket firing version. But looking at him, he looks awesome, just like I remember him, except you've got the rocket as a separate piece there, so definitely different. Now, it's very difficult to see from here the jetpack and the spring-loaded launcher function, what that looks like. So I'll throw up a photo, and as you'll see from the photo, that it is a J-hook type launcher on the back for this one. All right, so what I'll do now is, like I did with IG-88, I'm going to grab my vintage Kenner Boba Fett just to compare the two together. And as you can see, it is a very good match. Everything looks in place. Going back and forth here. Yep, everything is looking good. Now, let me show you something. I did notice something here with the knee. On the right leg, the lower knee, his right leg, the lower knee is painted yellow on the vintage figure, but they didn't paint that one on the jumbo. So, but what I'm not sure of is if there are variants of the vintage Kenner figure where it's not painted, and maybe they were going with that variant. So let me know in the comments if you guys are aware if there is variants without that painted. So maybe that was done on purpose by General Giant. Now, again, I forgot to show you guys the back of the card, so here it is. There's the nice retro description of the rocket-firing Fett, and I love the caution, do not launch projectile towards face warning. That is excellent. And the rest of the card has some more images of other jumbo figures and some other products from General Giant. So overall, these are awesome figures. I love the jumbo line. The only bad thing about them is they take up so much space, but if you have the room for them, I highly recommend them because they are a ton of fun. So that's going to do it for this episode of Brett on Fett. Let me know in the comments what you think of General Giant's rendition of the McQuarrie concept art, reimagined as a vintage style Kenner figure. Thanks for checking out this video. As always, a huge thanks to my subscribers. Don't forget you can always follow me on Instagram and on Twitter. Take care, and we'll see you next time.